This SIDGE Center program is supported by the Three Sisters Foundation in partnership with the Public Interest Technology University Network and the Corporation for Public Interest Technology.
The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at norcalmlkfoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
All right, why don't we get started? Moving here, my name is Aaron Grizzell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation. I want to welcome you here to our SIDGE session. So this is our, SIDGE stands for the Center for Social Impact, Development, and Global Engagement. It's a center that was founded at the foundation to deal with the issues around predictive modeling, AI, questions about tech. How do we take advantage of these new technologies in a wholesome way? How do we center and recenter sort of the human being in it all in technology, and then how to deal with strategies to harness the powerful tech that's out there for our benefit and our organizational benefit. And that's what this session is today. We partnered with the Corporation for Public Interest Technology that is co-founded and headed by our guest today, Dr. Sylvester Johnson. Dr. Johnson is, again, the co-founder of CPIT. It's a public benefit corporation that centers on helping small to medium-sized organizations harness these new technologies for the benefit of your organizations, to ensure that we can not only get the most out of them, but what it is that we can build in as best practices for utilizing these new instruments that we have. All right. So without further, now I could say a whole lot. I'm going to stop right here. I could say a whole lot about Dr. Johnson. He's a professor of Black Studies and of Religion at Northwestern University. He is a Kluge Fellow at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. He was former Vice Provost at Virginia Tech University, and he is an all-around expert when it comes to technology futures and this idea of predictive and generative technology that we've heard so much about, but we are looking for in our organizations ways in which we can harness it the most. So what we want to do is we want to bring Dr. Johnson up. He can engage us, and then we can ask questions and interact as we go forward. Let's give a hand for Dr. Sylvester Johnson.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be back in San Francisco this year. I had the pleasure of coming last year to experience most of that week of the MLK celebration that the Northern California MLK Foundation hosts, and excited to be here again. Really grateful to you at the NorCal MLK Foundation, and also the way that you are bringing together so many different communities of people to be part of solutions for advancing social justice and for making our world better, for enabling more democratic possibilities that were so much at the center of what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing and dedicating his life and his mission. And good morning to all of you. Thank you for coming. I'm looking forward to hopefully some conversation, doing a Q&A on the end. So as the founding CEO of the Corporation for Public Interest Technology, I'm excited to be able to talk with you and any audiences about some of the ways that we have a unique opportunity right now, regionally, nationally, globally. I say regionally because this is San Francisco. There is very much center of gravity here for tech innovation, but also globally and across our nation, to harness the power of technology in ways that can actually be more enabling and empowering for communities that are mission focused. And as a public benefit company, the Corporation for Public Interest Technology is especially focused on developing ways to create more accountability to the impact that tech has on our society. How do we support civil society more? How do we become more accountable to institutions of democratic participation? How do we take a more human-centered, community-minded approach when we're thinking about what tech does, how we design it, how we implement it, how we regulate it? So those are things that led to the creation of our company, and we've been very excited to partner with organizations to help support their mission in the way that we described here. What I want to do this morning is to explain just some general things. It's not going to be a grand seminar on AI. It will be just a general introduction to some of the important ways that artificial intelligence technology has developed to try to make more legible what is happening right now, because there's a lot of attention to a particular form of AI that's on this slide, Gen AI, to explain what some of the potential benefits and risks are to this technology. Because one of the things that is especially true with AI, and more specifically generative AI, is that as I'll explain, it could scale across an organization far beyond the ways that previous versions of AI could. And that has some negative potential, and it also has some positive potential. I'll talk about some examples of ways that mission-minded organizations, particularly small organizations, nonprofits, can experience more ability to execute their mission in ways that are ethically aligned. Our company focuses particularly on supporting the ability of our clients to have an ethics-first, public interest-first approach to how they're implementing technology. That's not something we hear about a lot in the media when we hear about AI, but it is extremely urgent and extremely important, and it has been the basis for how we're proceeding. So I'll talk about a few of those things. I'll give some specific examples of how organizations can actually draw on the benefits of this technology to control for some of the risks and harms that we know have become an issue with this technology. And then to talk more about forward-looking, what might be on the horizon. And we'll have some Q&A. Would love to hear any questions or thoughts that you have. Most people who are even halfway hearing something on the news have some ideas about this technology, and I find it interesting to always hear your perspectives on it. Okay. So again, really excited that we're gathered here for such an important momentous commemoration annually, and thank you again, Aaron, for making this possible. So this slide is basically a very clear, basic summary of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a term that is used to refer to the performance of machines or actions that machines do that when humans do it, we tend to assume requires intelligence. So if I asked you to tell me a story and you did, I would say, well, you must have had some intelligence to do that. If I asked you for directions and you say, well, where do you want to go? And I tell you, well, I'm trying to get to such and such a place. And you say, well, where are you starting from? And I say, well, I live here. And you were able to sketch that out for me. I would feel, well, you must have had some intelligence to do that. And so just in the very, very basic sense, whether it's playing a game of chess or checkers or giving directions or doing something more sophisticated, the term is broad, artificial intelligence. It just refers to a range of different things that machines might do, that when humans do it, we assume that requires intelligence to do it. So that's a very easy, non-technical version. And then you can get a more techie version, but that's actually, I think, one of the more useful ways of trying to understand that. And so that definition is big. It can include a lot of things. And so that's why this diagram has AI including these other things. It's a big category. AI is not new in that sense, in that very broad sense. It's been around since roughly the mid-20th century, the mid-1900s, roughly. Very early forms in the 40s, but especially 1950s. Machine learning is a little bit more specific. It's a type of AI that became very popular in the early 2010s, so think 2008, 2010, 2012, particularly about 2015. And machine learning refers to a type of AI that happens when, instead of trying to give a machine specific instructions, such as how to play chess. If this piece moves this way, do that. So those are rules. Machine learning basically gives lots of data to a software system so that software system can recognize patterns. A common example you may have already heard about is, instead of trying to explain what a cat looks like to a computer, saying, well, something that has 2 eyes and whiskers and a nose, because that could be almost any animal or any mammal, you just show hundreds of thousands of pictures of cats to the software, and it could pick out a pattern, and then when you show it a picture it's never seen before, it should be able to classify that picture as being a cat or not. And so you don't have to write specific instructions. Then you can do things that are harder to do that can be more useful. If you've ever used GPS to get directions from one place to another, that's machine learning. No one predicted where you were going to go any day that you might want to use GPS, and said, okay, let me tell the software how to get Sylvester Johnson from all these places he might go to somewhere else. It's just trained on patterns, and then when I give it a new request, it uses what it's learned to give me an answer. So that's machine learning. Generative AI is usually what people hear about when we hear news today about AI. And generative AI is distinguished by that, and I have gen there, short for generative, because it can generate something new that it's not seen before. So instead of just recognizing a picture of a cat, generative AI can create a picture of a cat. It can't just tell you, is this a cat or not, or it will create the picture of the cat or a sound of a cat. And their generative AI has mainly first textual, but also visual and even auditory forms. In other words, it can create sounds, such as music. I've told you it can create pictures and also now film. What people usually use generative AI for is textual, but increasingly other uses. And so that's summarized here. AI is a big term. Machine learning really caught on in the 2010s. And machine learning, by the way, makes possible that generative AI. It's a specific example of machine learning. So that's just a little bit of a basic overview of what people mean when they use these terms. A lot of what I'll be talking about will be particular to generative AI, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. Because organizations today have found themselves in what people keep saying is a unique moment for labor, particularly for workforce, I want to just briefly describe some trends that we're seeing in the workforce. One observation that was made recently by the World Economic Forum in their 2025 Future of Jobs report is that within just 5 years, about 2030, we will see automation, which includes not just software, but robots that move physically. We will see automation eliminate close to 10 million jobs, 9.9, that's a lot. And that's not the end of the story, also create new jobs. So the net of that is that they're anticipating in just 5 years, we will see more jobs disappear than get created, but about 1 million difference in those numbers. You know, there may be a net loss, but it doesn't mean new things aren't getting created. A lot of people have raised questions about what kind of jobs will get created. Well, will a job that had benefits get eliminated, and the job that gets created is one that does not have benefits, that does not have health care, does not have retirement contributions? So those are important questions. We don't know, some of that depends, but But that's just a way of saying, before we celebrate all these new jobs getting created, we also have to be cautious and wonder, well, will they provide the same kind of job security and human security that is being eliminated in those other jobs? And again, that just depends, but it's just an example of how we have to try to anticipate things and be very cautious while we're also trying to manage these innovations. The changing workforce is especially being shaped by AI and its adoption and implementation. So one of the things that is distinctive about generative AI is that it has made the most important and useful programming language become English. So if you write English or speak English, you can now use a computer that is an AI software system to do things that you need done. You don't need special training. You don't need to know how to write code or use code. The analogy is thinking back to before computers had hard drives. I remember when I was first using a computer and you turned it on and you had to have what's called a boot disk to get it started. And then if you wanted to do word processing, you have to have another disk that was called your program disk. And you put the program disk in there after you booted up the computer, and then you did your work. And you had to know all these special commands. You had to know how to access the hard drive, C:// and send it to a directory. You had to have some special skills even to do that. And then computers had pictures where you can just click and drag stuff, and that made it easier. You didn't know how to type a certain command to make it go to the directory. If you wanted to copy something, you would just click something and right-click it and choose copy. If you wanted to delete a file, you didn't have to know the command for delete. You just drag it to a picture of a garbage can. And that made it easier. And eventually these machines were able to be used by people who didn't know special language for computers, okay? So we're seeing the same kind of thing with AI. Generative AI is the same kind of thing. You don't need to know how to write code in order to get this thing to do what you want to do. That's a big difference. What it means is that typically you had an organization, say with 40 people in that organization, 2 of them knew how to code. So they used the AI. And the other 38 people in that organization couldn't use the AI. With Gen AI, anybody in your organization can use it. And I'll talk about why that can be a good and bad thing later on. But it is changing the workforce in a way that previous forms have not. And partly for that reason, it's the most highly adoptable form of AI we've ever seen. It's also important to understand that AI, which is often described as taking over the world or taking over society, is not doing that. It is being used by human beings. And we often hear people say things about what AI is going to do. It's going to start this war, or it's going to create this problem. And what we have to remember is that there's no AI apart from people, and there's no use of AI apart from people who are using it to do something. And that doesn't mean you can't have it to do a task, quote unquote, independently. It's just that you would have to set it up to do that. So it's still not separate from people. And this is just one reason why people have suggested that we should really think more about AI as augmenting human intelligence. It's not replacing human intelligence. Human intelligence is not going away. It's adding to the ability of people to do what they were already doing with their intelligence in order to extend that. So that's why that extension, that explanation is there. There are a lot of changes that are happening in AI that are advancing very quickly. Some people would say too quickly. Before our society figures out implications of one thing, we're already hearing about something else, and then trying to figure out how do we handle this new thing that's happening. But there are several new innovations that are emerging in AI, and one is multimodal capabilities. So what that term means is that whereas AI started off as you having to type something, you text, and the AI would produce something that was also textual. You can now talk to the AI, and it can talk back to you. You don't have to type. It can listen to something. It can see. You can connect it to a camera, and you can show it a room or a picture, arts or objects on the street. So I'm living in Chicago right now, and and I've been reading about your self-driving taxis, and I think I saw about 5 of them. And I was outside for about 5 minutes, and I saw at least 5 of those things. So they're interpreting visual data, and that's just an example of AI being multimodal. It's not just textual. That's what that means. That's multimodal form is just getting started. If we look at how people are working to make that better, and look at how many people are trying to do that and how much effort and money they're spending to do it, it makes sense to anticipate that we're probably going to see this get a lot better relatively quickly. But it's already possible to interact with machines, with AI, by talking, by showing it being multimodal. So that's what that means. Agentic AI is a term that we'll hear a lot about in 2025 and going forward. And that basically means that instead of a person having to work with the AI to get something done, they can have the AI to do something on its own after the human sets it up to do that something on its own. I'll give you a very simple example of this that some of us have already used. There's a tech entrepreneur who created a company called Calendly that allows you to schedule meetings, and you can connect your personal calendar to their platform, and then people can just go on your website and they can decide when they want to meet with you based on what you've said. If you say, I'm going to have my calendar open on Tuesdays from 1 to 5, then people can just go and they can click when they want to meet. And then the platform will email that person a confirmation, and it'll email you and say, hey, someone's going to be meeting with you, and it'll put that in your calendar. Okay? So it was doing that. Now, you had to give it permission to do that. Someone had to program it to do that. The AI didn't just wake up one morning and say, aha, I'm going to take over people's calendars. They're still humans, but they could set it up to do something on its own. So that's a very simple example of an agent. We're going to see a lot more things like that, where the software can do several tasks by itself. It can make decisions and just start doing things. And some of those tasks might be stuff that are part of our jobs. It could be, I'm a professor. I'm just going to make up this example. And I'm not going to judge it, because it could be something we don't want to do or we do want to do. But when the students submit a paper, it could be that the agent in the future says, well, thank you for this submission. You'll receive your grade in X number of days, and then it creates an assessment of that paper before I even get to read it. It reads it, and it can basically say to the student, this looks pretty good, but your professor will finish giving you feedback. Meet with the professor later on. But the point is, we're going to see a lot more of that. Hyper-personalization just means that because the AI can use so much of our data, and it's a question of whether we want it to, but because it can, we can get responses from it that are fine-tuned to be what Sylvester Johnson is interested in. So if I'm an educator, I want news about education, it can just send me in my inbox every morning articles about education based on things I'm interested in, and the same software might send you something different. So that's what that means. Advanced conversational AI, the ability to speak with AI is going to get a lot different. I have a pet peeve that when I call a helpline now, I usually get a computer, and it says something like, thank you for calling this helpline. You can say yes or no to the next question. Would you like to change your password on your account? And I can say one or two things, yes or no. And it say, okay. Would you like to do this? You can say option A, B, or C, because they can only understand A, B, or C. And I'm sitting there, I actually try to hit 0, because in the old days, that used to get you to a human. Now they've gotten smart, they just ignore the 0, and you have to hit it a lot, and sometimes it still won't work. But pretty soon, you're gonna get a response on those things, and it's not gonna say you can only say yes or no. You can talk to it the way you talk to a human. And you can say or ha, or well, and it'll still understand what you're saying, and it can even do it in a language that works for you. It can be fluent in German, French, Spanish, Creole, you name it. We're gonna see that happening. That's what that means, advanced conversational. Open source AI models are just, this is software that is available for people to use without having to pay to use that software. And there are different examples of this. So if you've ever used Google Docs to do something, you didn't have to pay a subscription to Google Docs if you had a personal use of it. Now, if your company were using it, that's different. Whereas if you use Microsoft Word, you're not going to use that for free. You're going to have to pay for Microsoft Word. Google Docs is not open source software. I was trying to make a point about whether you have to pay for something or not, but that's not a good example because it's actually not open source. It's just that they don't charge you to use it. But open source software can be used without you having to pay for it, and you can change it, you can modify it if you want to. So there's some AI models out there that you can use, and even if you run a company, you can take it and use it in your company, or you can use it for personal. And small language models. So if you have heard anything about the environmental concerns for AI, you've probably heard about the amount of electricity that AI consumes and the amount of water, fresh water, that it requires to cool data centers that are making all of this possible. And that's a significant concern. We're seeing significant improvements in the efficiency of AI, meaning that there have already been reductions of 20 times or more in the amount of electricity required to perform certain things that AI did just 2 years ago versus now. But more people are using it, and it's still using a lot of electricity. Small language models are a term that refers to a lighter version of an AI software product that could fit on you can run it on a laptop. And so it uses as much electricity as a laptop. And we're going to see more uses of that. So that will be one way of trying to mitigate environmental impacts for this AI. So those are some emerging trends that we're going to hear a lot more about this year and in the coming years, particularly the agentic. One of the things that our company has really gotten excited about is being able to have conversations, particularly with mission-oriented, typically but not always nonprofit organizations. Any organization or company can be mission-minded. What I mean by that, by mission-minded, because every company has a mission, every organization, is there's a focus particularly on having a positive impact on society. Because we are a public benefit company, we are especially interested in supporting the ability of small organizations, nonprofits especially, to be able to achieve greater sustainability and impact and achieve their mission by helping them to figure out how to respond to this technology. What should they avoid? Don't waste your time on this. This is not good. Don't create these problems for yourself. Here are some benefits. This can actually help your organization. That's what we're doing. And one of the things that we've gotten really excited about is that there's such amazing stories to be told about how organizations can benefit from this technology when you have an ethical approach to it, when you're implementing in the right way, when you have the right kind of help to understand some things you don't waste your time on that's not useful or it's not helpful, it might be harmful. And other things, if you implemented this in this way in your organization, it could create a huge difference. And by huge difference, I'll give some examples later, but it could create such efficiencies in your ability to have the people in your organization to stay in your organization, that you're able to be much more sustainable than you would have been without it. So what we hear about in the media, and our media have gotten, if you compare today to 20 years ago, our media have gotten a lot better in paying attention to the problems of technology. 20 years ago, everybody was excited about the internet and smartphones. I remember people referring to the information superhighway and the global village, the idea the internet's gonna bring us all together. And there's some truth to that. We have so much technology in the United States. I find it helpful to pay attention to what's happening in countries that are not as wealthy as the US, to see just how valuable the technology is. And when people don't have 5 computers, I have one strapped to my arm. I got a couple of them in that bag right now because I left one somewhere else. Actually, I have 3 in that bag, I think. But we have so much technology, it's easy for us to say, this is a problem. When you don't have access to the internet except maybe one day a week, it becomes quickly visible that this technology can play an important role and has value. But most of what we hear in our media today, particularly in the US, is actually about the problems that technology and AI are bringing. What we don't hear as much about is how and why it's useful. So if we think about small organizations, here are some of their common challenges, and over here are ways that the ethical and skillful adoption of AI can actually be one possible way of making a huge difference in that organization. Nonprofits especially are typically revenue constrained. Most nonprofits are not selling a product, they're often getting grants, but even if they are selling a service or product, maybe they put on a play, for example. It's a community-based theater program, and they charge admission for the play, and maybe it's only $5 per ticket or something like that. So they're generating some revenue, but you can't run a theater program out for $5 a ticket. They still have to rely on other forms of revenue. And the point is that they can't easily increase the amount of money that they're bringing in. But guess what always increases nonstop while you're sleeping? Your expenses. Inflation's working, or whatever subscription you have, for if it's cable or whatever, it's gonna cost more in a couple of years than it does now. Your personnel, we should be paying people for their labor, and the cost of living goes up, and so most organizations are trying to at least have some way of addressing cost of living by increasing what they pay their workers. That's going up. But what doesn't go up as easily in a nonprofit situation is your revenue. Well, one of the things that can happen with AI is if there is some revenue generation going on, it can make a big difference to figure out how to implement AI to increase that revenue generation. If it's a nonprofit, maybe that doesn't move the needle all the way to solve the whole problem, but it can help with what's going on. And that can be done without having to increase your personnel. And what we hear in the media, which is true, is that large companies, just think of a big company, I don't have to name any, they're laying off X percentage of people, or they're doing this. People say, oh, they got that AI, now they're laying off all the software engineers, those people don't have a job. And we hear that, and so it's easy to think that AI is this bad thing that puts people out of jobs. But what the media are not paying attention to is our small companies and nonprofits, and how it can make a difference for them. Because nonprofits aren't trying to lay off anybody. They need everybody they can get, and they need to hold on to those people. This can help, expanding your mission impact. So I sit on the boards of several nonprofits. I have never, and you're probably chuckling, Aaron, because you run a nonprofit. Nonprofits are always trying to expand their impact. I've never been to a board meeting where they say, last year we were able to help 1,000 people get food security and housing security. We don't want to do that as much next year. We're going to reduce it, but I've never heard that at the board meeting. What happens at the annual board meetings is this year, we were able to get 1,000 people to have housing security. But we know that there are 2 million people in our region who don't have housing. So instead of 1,000 next year, we want to do 1,500. In other words, nonprofit, they're always trying to expand their ability to make things better. And that's just because they care about the impact of what they're doing, and there's not enough good to go around. You know that the problems always outweigh your ability to solve those problems. And so you try to increase that. And expanding that mission impact is really hard if you can't just magically wave a wand and grow your revenue. So how do you do that? And this is what we've been most excited about, particularly because the AI can actually significantly, in a transformative way, increase the ability of nonprofits to do that, to expand their mission, when they can't afford to increase their staff by 10% or 25% or even 1%. Often what we find in our clients is nonprofit, they're just trying to hold on to the people they have, and they still want to increase their impact. And we don't hear that story about AI in the media. We don't hear how organizations that are actually trying to do social good, that are advancing social justice, that are working really hard to make people's lives better and to ameliorate the conditions that they're facing, can actually do more of that if they can expand their impact when they don't have money in their budget to increase their staffing by 10%. But they might be able to increase their impact by 10%. You see? And that's what we've gotten excited about. That's not the story we hear in the news, I guess because the old saying is that good news doesn't sell, that people are more attracted to hearing about problems, and we do need to hear about the problems. And I think we also need to make sure that mission-minded organizations do not miss out on the ability to elevate the important work that they're doing. Staff burnout. This is something that we hear time after time after time when we're talking with organizations about what they're facing. And again, this is across the society. People in the United States don't get enough sleep, even though we we used to not have dishwashers and washing machines. Now we don't have to wash laundry by hand. So we have less time. We're doing something with our time. But nonprofits, particularly because of expanding that mission impact, people are burning out. Every year, the board says, yeah, we're gonna expand our impact. We're gonna go to from 1,000 to 1,500. And people are like, yeah, we want to keep people from starving. We want to make sure people have housing. And the staff are not going to say, no, we're not going to help anybody else. I'm too tired. They don't say that. They just do the work. And you know what happens year after year is that you get overwhelmed. You feel, and people have told us, like, we feel like we're just trying to keep our head above the water. That's what we're trying to do. We're just trying not to drown. And after 3 or 4 years of that, it can actually wear down people where they love the mission, they really care about the impact, and they're just burnt out. It's hard. Well, there are these things that AI can do that I'll talk about in a moment that can actually take some of the load off of those personnel. We're not talking about laying off people. You see, what you hear about in the media is layoffs. We're talking, how do you actually take care of your people who are there so they can keep being there? And I don't hear that story. In the media, I do hear this need when we talk to organizations, and what we love to do is say, well, we know you're revenue constrained. We know you're just trying to hold on to you're not getting rid of anybody. You're not trying to use AI to replace people. You're trying to help people to thrive while they're trying to make our world better. And here's a way to do that that is very feasible. And so this is very important. And finally, growing expenditures. This is on the top is revenue is constrained. On the bottom is expenses are like wild turkeys. They just running all over the place, and it just increases. And the AI adoption that is ethically shaped and deliberately, strategically adopted can actually control the growth of those. You can start to slow down some of those expenses. And you know what that helps you to do? It helps you to have a sustainable budget, again, so you can take care of your people. If you can hold on to your people and you can provide them, maybe you can provide them with more compensation or not. You just keep it. You can just make sure that you don't have to lay off people because you didn't get that grant, or the cost of your rent went up, and you can't control the landlord. You can't call the landlord and say, just reduce it back by 75% because we just don't have as much money in the budget. You either have to shut up and close shop and move somewhere else, or you have to cut something so you can pay that rent. With the AI, you can start to control some other expenses that free up money in your budget, so you can hold on to what you have and keep going forward. I'm going to say this again. We don't hear that story in the media. But that is real. That is real. Those are real possibilities. And it's why, as a public benefit company, we really take serious this mission. How can we harness the potential of technology to actually support people and organizations who are working really hard to make our world better? That is one of the most important questions that we will have to answer this year, next year, and the years after that. And we want to be really committed to giving the best answer we can to that question. So I want to talk about I've talked about some benefits, and I'm going to talk about some use cases, but there are challenges that happen with AI. Okay? And as I said, our media, they don't really talk about the positive benefits of technology, particularly AI, but we hear about other problems. And yet it is important that we know about problems. My point is we need to know all sides of it, but there are problems and challenges, and part of our role as a public benefit company that's a tech company is to bring an ethical accountability to this technology. So one problem is that it's called the black box problem, and basically what this means is that AI has gotten so sophisticated that it's really hard to understand often how it reaches decisions that it makes. And if you are an insurance company or financial services company and someone applies for, say, a mortgage loan, you're not sitting there with a pencil and paper in the mortgage company saying, okay, we have 17,000 applications to do this month. I'm just going to go one by one with my calculator. No, they're using software to do those 17,000 applications for lending. That's how they're processing those applications. Otherwise, they'd never get to 17,000. They wouldn't get to 1,000. And yet, it's very important that when a decision, if the software says Sylvester Johnson should not be deemed qualified for a loan, there had better be some explanation about, well, why? We should be able to understand how that software told us we should deny Sylvester Johnson the ability to apply, to get a loan so that he can have a place to live. And it shouldn't be a situation, oh, well, you know, yeah, the AI told us, we're not really sure how it reached that conclusion, but we just trust it. No, we need to be able to explain that. And the more complicated the AI is, the harder it is to have a clear explanation of how it reached that conclusion. So this is one of the things that Aaron was talking about with predictive models. If they're making a prediction about what I might do and whether I should be eligible, that is a place that needs some ethical accountability. Data privacy and security are also really important. So one of our team members has really focused for decades on cybersecurity and is leading our effort to make that part of how we support organizations. I told you that there's something called a small language model. You can put it on a laptop and it does, it's generative AI. If your organization doesn't want to upload your data to the cloud to have AI work on it, we can configure something for you that sits inside of your office in your building where you watch it and your data never even leaves your office if that's what you want. Typically, this information gets uploaded to the cloud in the most powerful models. And it's important to be clear about who has access to your data. This could be financial data. It could be your client's data. It could be all kinds of things. So that needs to be controlled. Algorithmic bias and discrimination are the kinds of problems that we've heard a lot about, particularly gender bias and racial bias. And some people have said, well, bias is not a strong enough word. Discrimination or racism are the terms that we need to use, or sexism are words we need to use. The point is that these are persisting problems. Some of those things have been improved. Some of those problems have been rectified, a lot of them have not. And that could be a whole nother conversation on how we make that better and why it isn't. A big part of that is the human beings who are actually designing those systems. You need diverse teams of people who have the background and experience and who are good at not just math. We need good mathematics and engineering. We also have people who are really good at inequality and understand these other vectors of social systems. Environmental and human costs. I've told you the biggest concern about AI's environmental impact, not the only, but the biggest is the demands on electricity and the rare earth minerals that are required to build computing hardware. So you think of the things that go into a smartphone, or the elements that are minerals that are required to create semiconducting chips. Where does that come from? Usually those come from parts of the world that are so-called developing economies. People not wealthy there, and they've already experienced centuries of exploitation. We'll take your resources, pay you almost nothing, and we'll use it to build, the Empire State Building. So most of our steel and rubber to do that came from Liberia. But Liberia didn't sufficiently benefit from having rubber trees, and they're still taken out, or their iron ore taken out of Liberia to build these beautiful buildings in the first world. We exploited that situation. Are we just going to keep doing the same thing when it comes to AI? We should not. We've got to change it. So that's some of that. This image is taken from Kate Crawford's Anatomy of an AI System. And if you're interested in reading more about some of these challenges, Kate Crawford is one of many authors who's written very skillfully about this. But there are others. Aaron Grizel brought Sophia Noble to talk with us about some of this last year. And we're having a panel this evening as well on technology. So there are high-level risks. There are very important reasons why we can't just say, oh, let's just not worry about the downsides of AI. Let's just, these benefits look great. That's all we need to focus on. I'll say this again, our media have been very focused on the problems. And these problems are important challenges that need to be addressed. And that's why what we have focused on is bringing an ethical framework and a deliberate strategy that aligns with the mission of organizations to say, here's how we can help you. If you want to adopt this, here's how we can help you do it. And it's aligned with your values, and it's paying attention to some of these issues so we can mitigate these problems. At a very high level, what are some of the use case benefits of AI adoption? So one is that the AI can amplify human connections. What I mean by that is, I want to ask you to raise your hand, but you can silently, you can raise an imaginary hand. How many of you get up every day to inbox zero, where you have 0 emails that are unread, and don't raise your hand. I'll just tell you, I'm honest, I've never gotten to inbox 0. I've tried, I've had different methods and strategies, I've never done it. I have a close friend and colleague, he's done inbox 0 for the past 20-some years. And every time he says it, I get envy is not good for the world. But I get a little green, just a little bit every time I hear him say, look, how are you doing that? But my point is that all of us in some way have things that is part of what we do every day. They take up our time, and they take us away from human-to-human contact and interaction, because we've got to get down to something, and usually that means we're sitting in front of a screen, usually by ourselves, trying to get something done. And a long time ago, people did stuff with other humans together. Now, I'm saying we should let's just all go back to the 1700s. I'm not going back to the 1700s. I'll take the 21st century, even though we have real problems here. I'm not saying we should just go back. I'm saying that the way that we work has shifted our ability to connect with other human beings. That's what I'm saying. And that we have to be thoughtful about that. And that is actually one way that the AI adoption can help. It can help to power through more quickly some of those tasks that require us to retreat from other human beings and to be in front of that screen by ourselves. And it can help us we still have to do some of that, but spend less time doing that and more time being around those other humans and doing some of those things that we place a lot greater value on. All the work is important and it all needs to get done, but we should not, as human beings, be spending less and less time every year with other human beings in order to get our work done. It can also enhance the program impact of organizations to support scaling things like curriculum content, or we use to adopt materials for diverse audiences. Grant management is another area where if you're doing intelligence augmentation, as I like to think about this, IA, or the mission of intelligence augmentation, is really to ensure that we are bringing together the ability of human beings and machines so that human beings can be better at what we're doing. We can get some of our time back because most of us are overworked, and we can actually be much more impactful. So managing grants and producing grant writing is just another example. That is something that generative AI is incredibly skillful at. Many of us have heard about the problems of the AI making up things that don't exist, or claiming something that's not true, and that's been called hallucination. People have debated the term. Some people should just say, why not just say it made up something? Why call it hallucination? But that problem has become less and less of a problem. The AI has gotten a lot better, even just in the past 12 months, let alone 24 months. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to be checked. It just means that it's gotten so much better that it can make a positive difference. If this is the kind of thing you use as an example of a use case, it's an easy way, it's low-hanging fruit to take advantage of this. Data into insights is another very good example of how generative AI can be useful. And that is if your organization, so nonprofits have to report to boards, for example, and you have your quarterly board meeting. I told you I'm on the boards of several nonprofits. And we get these board books and we get the financial report in there, and it's supposed to summarize different things that happen. Right now, humans have to go through and look at their financial reporting and translate that for a board. Or it could be a different audience. It doesn't have to be a board book. The AI can do that in just a few minutes. Now, you gotta go check it. But you also have to check what the humans are doing. If you're a supervisor and someone brings you a financial report, you should review it. You don't just take it and say, oh, okay, well, Sylvester handed me this, I'm not even gonna look at it. Things have to be checked. The time saving, though, is astronomical. It really is a huge thing. And that doesn't mean people have nothing to do. Again, what we hear in the media is, well, if people are adopting this technology, they're gonna be out of work. If you're one of these huge companies and you have 15, 20, 30,000 employees, they're thinking about that. And even with them, there's an argument for that's not the best strategy. That's just not the reality for these smaller organizations. If you're a small to medium-sized enterprise or you're a nonprofit, you have to hold on to your people. That's just very clear, and it's an entirely different story that we should be hearing more about. So these are some examples of the benefits. Workflow management is also something else, and I have here some of the risks to consider: data privacy and consent, accessibility and equity of use, the potential loss of personal touch due to over-automation. In theory, you could get AI to write every single email for you now. I don't actually do that every single email. And then, my AI is emailing you, and your AI is reading my AI's email, and you're not even reading it. And we're not even dealing with each other anymore. It is possible to go overboard with this. But the workflow management is something that is very good for being able to create more human-to-human contact. Data analytics is something else that is very important. Organizations that use Salesforce for their customer relationship management already are getting AI into that, and Salesforce calls that Einstein. That's what they call their AI. So that's an example of AI that's an enterprise software. Any company that is an enterprise software company, so Microsoft is, Salesforce is, that is not integrating AI into their product will be soon. I mean, it's not going to be possible market-wise to be viable as a enterprise software company, and you're not making AI, generative AI, available inside of that enterprise software. What this means for even small organizations is that you might not know it, but you might already have some AI in your organization. In fact, we had a client tell us, we're not using AI right now, but we want to explore how we might. And within a month, what they realized is that they had people in their organizations who were secretly using it, and they had it built into some of the enterprise software that they were paying for and didn't even realize it. So the data analytics is very important in creating data visualization and being able to create more in-depth analysis. And the capacity of this AI has gotten so good that it can give the kinds of insights that very knowledgeable, skillful financial experts who had decades of experience in generating financial analysis have been able to give. You can actually get that kind of depth from the AI. And it doesn't mean you throw away your human. It doesn't mean you tell your CFO, oh, go home, we don't need you anymore. It means that your CFO doesn't have to spend their entire day locked up, out of touch with it. You can't even get a meeting with them because they're just behind a stack of papers and 5 screens all day long. They can actually come out and at least have 2 or 3 meetings with other human beings, and then they go back and they still have some work to do. Content creation, of course, if you have a website, newsletters, podcasts, magazine, any of that, social media, this kind of content can be tailored and created relatively quickly so that you get a first draft of something. It's not like the AI gives out something, you say, okay, I'm not gonna read this, I'm not gonna think about it. The AI spit it out, I'm just gonna go straight to my website. Of course you should look at it, read it. People often will edit that, but you could go from a blank screen to a first draft in about 3 seconds. And then you have something that you can work with. And what used to take you 8 to 10 hours to do a newsletter, maybe you're getting that newsletter done in 1 hour. You just saved 7 hours. That's one person with one example, let's say 7 hours. Right? What else could you do that week with those 7 hours? And then imagine that happens every day with different tasks where you're getting back 2, 3, 5 hours of your time a day. And you can begin to see, oh, okay, so if we have only 6 people in our nonprofit, we're trying to do all these things. We were gonna spend $30,000 a year to hire someone part-time to do our newsletter and our comms for us. But now we see how we can take some work off of this person with the AI. They could do this newsletter in about an hour and a half, and we just do one of those every month. And then all this other stuff that's not getting done. I had just last week we were talking with one client who told us they've been undergoing some changes. They actually have funding to hire people, but they've had so much turnover, and it's just been hard to do all this change. They didn't get their annual report done last year because they had so many things on their plate, and they didn't have the capacity within their organization. And AT&T is going to get their annual stuff paid because they're fine, right? You hear about them in the media. Microsoft's going to get their annual report done. What about our small organizations that are trying to make things work from month to month or year to year? So this is an example of that. So I hope that you have found helpful this overview of what this technology is, some of the distinctions and the concerns about it and its potential uses. What are the benefits? What are some of the risks and harms? What are some specific examples of applying this technology to things that are just really important, critical? Almost every organization, regardless of who you are, you have a need to communicate with people. If money runs through your organization, if money doesn't run through your organization, you don't have an organization, you can't do anything. If money runs through it, you gotta manage it, you gotta report, you gotta do all of that. And those are just things that are relevant to everyone, and especially at the administrative level, leaders of organizations that are mission-minded and entire teams. They're there because they care deeply about these issues. Again, they're working every day, often too many days a week, losing too many weekends because they actually care about how they're gonna make the lives of people in their communities better. We are made to feel, in what we usually hear about this technology, that it is this big threat, it's just gonna put people out of work, it's just gonna replace jobs, it's just biased, it's just gonna introduce problems. And the truth is that that's part of the story. There are problems to this technology. There are problems to everything. If you hire a human, people have HR because they have to deal with human problems. There's no such thing as problem-free. But the technology is getting better. It's already gotten really more than good enough for everyday people, organizations that don't have huge budgets, that have real teams of human beings who care about the ethical impact of what they're doing, to be able to benefit from this. And to do so in a way where you don't have to go out and get a computing degree. You don't have to go out, now we gotta hire a software engineer or AI expert. Actually, this is sort of like when graphical user interface hits the personal computer and you didn't have to know all those commands anymore. You could just click and drag the pictures to do what you wanted to do, the icons. Like, that's what generative AI is doing. It's making it possible for people across teams to benefit from the technology. And it is important as we move into a climate where the political exchanges and discourse around technology are becoming more and more divisive, more and more fraught, that we figure out as people who actually care about justice, we care about making our world better, we want to see more democratic possibilities, we want to see the kind of world that King and the network of people and organizations who are part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and those other cognate organizations, but what they were fighting for. How are we going to create more inclusive growth? How are we going to let more people participate in our society and do so in a way they thrive? We have to make sure that as this technology advances, as the conversations about it and the fights about it move forward, that we do not allow the most precious organizations and communities who are fighting to make our world better to get left out of the ability to elevate their mission, to invest in the human beings who are doing the work that they care about. Because I think that getting a more just and equitable world is going to require more of those kinds of organizations. I'm not against AT&T. I like having telephone technology or telephonics. I'm saying that we cannot let the complicated discourse about this technology cause us to forget that we should be helping our most precious organizations to thrive, to control the risks and harms, and to get the benefits so they can do our mission. That's what we're doing as a Corporation for Public Interest Technology. If you're interested in learning more about this, I hope you'll reach out to us. Our email address or our website there is CPIT, PBC, CPIT PBC, for the Corporation for Public Interest Technology, public benefit company, cpitpbc.com. And you can go there, be in touch with us. We have a free webinar we'll do for free with your team just to help you to understand what you should be thinking about. You don't have to buy anything or do anything. It's information that we're just giving away to your teams so that particularly mission-focused organizations can understand what should they be thinking about? How can they be sustainable in the future that's coming? How can they solve for the problems and also make sure that social justice organizations are benefiting from this? So thank you very much for the invitation to come and spend some time here, and thank all of you for being here this morning. We'd love to hear any questions you have. I'm happy to answer, or any thoughts to share. People, as I said, people think a lot of thoughts about technology. I love to hear people's perspectives and talk about this. So if there's anything you want to share, or if you have use cases in your own organization, I'd be happy to address those. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, that was great. So I am an independent contractor, and I work with small nonprofits and small businesses and you know, generally anyone. I will say that AI has given me the flexibility to bring in more clients. One of my focuses is grant writing, and I relented on doing it, but I do use ChatGPT a lot, and I use Otter AI. Otter AI has helped me in my meetings now and workshops I go to. I don't have to sit and take notes. I record it, it transcribes it, it even summarizes all of the action items and bullet points of importance throughout. And so I don't have to go back and listen to anything, but I do have to still go through it. But with ChatGPT, I'm curious because as a grant writer, I'm old school. I love writing, but I like to make it that personal touch. ChatGPT, I like because I can put in like a project name, or I can describe a project and it will create all the names that it could possibly be, and it'll give you meaning so that you can, you know, apply that to maybe a grant that you're working on. But I had a city department that reached out and had a client who didn't have a grant writer. And they said, oh, just use ChatGPT, you can get it done in a couple hours. It was due, like this was at 10, it was due at 5. But their thought process was, it's just so easy to do that. How do you feel about that? Because as a funder, they want that personal. I mean, can they disseminate between what's personal and what was done through AI? I mean, I like that personal touch, but a lot of people have just focused on using that a lot.
Yeah, thanks. That's such a great question, and it's a really, it's a live world, real world scenario. So thank you for sharing that, and it I think really clearly displays several important issues. You know, one you're asking about is about boundaries and what's been. And it's not even what's permissible or not, but what's preferable or not in terms of having a better proposal and that human element. I think as these technologies go forward, we're going to be talking a lot more about the kind of question you just asked, because you're asking what is the role of the human in this, and what does it mean to be personable? So as you just explained, and thank you for your example in your own business, your own company, it is certainly the case that as you just demonstrated, you can have more capacity to support these other organizations. And you can spend more of your time thinking high level. And it's not that taking notes is bad, it's just not the best use of your time, right? Because there are much more valuable things that you can do this. And if you're a solopreneur, so it's not like you can tell your team, oh, you know, 3 of you take those notes. And even if you could, that's not the best use of your money to pay 3 people over there to take notes, right? They could be doing other work. So it's certainly the case that people can produce a proposal in 2 hours. Can they produce a competitive winning proposal in literally 120 minutes? And you know this, the answer to this, because you use this technology. It's iterative. You know, you tell it, you give it some prompts, you tell it something, and it produces it. It's like humans do. You produce a draft of something, but you don't submit your first draft of a proposal. You know, you work through it, you sleep on it, you think about it, something else comes up, you add that in, and you realize, you know what, we've got to address this other issue. And you can get to it faster with the AI. So I would say that if someone literally has only 2 hours to go from, and it was probably, what you were describing was a quick summary, so I'm not saying this is exactly what you were presenting, but if someone hadn't started the proposal, and in 2 hours they were just trying to submit it, they wouldn't have time to do the kind of back and forth with themselves and with the AI that human beings have been doing for centuries, right? Because it's this thing where you go back and forth. They're not going to have the best proposal. You also asked, can funders tell what submissions are personable because they've been written by a human or with a lot of human involvement versus something that is almost completely copy and paste from the AI. And I will say right now, today, that, and you know this, so you have, if you use this technology, you realize there is a skill in knowing how to work with it. When I say anyone can start working with it, that doesn't mean anyone can do it well. You know, the classic example is ChatGPT, write me a paper on the Civil War, because a lot of people did this when it first came out. And if that's all they gave it, like, write me a paper, and so of course it would produce, just based on that one sentence, it would produce something, but it wasn't great, you know, it sounded like a machine that produced it. But if you give it lots of inputs and you can upload criteria, you can give it examples of your own writing. I want the diction and the style of the writing to be similar to what I've done in these examples. You can give it several examples. And if you give it an outline, and it can help you with the outline. You can say, help me develop an outline for this, I need to have that, then you work with it. And then you can say, okay, based on this outline, produce that. That's gonna take longer than 2 hours to get to a finished product. But if you compare going from 0 to finished proposal without any AI, you're saving weeks and maybe even months of your time. So right now, people can sometimes tell, funders can sometimes tell. If someone really knows how to use this software well, my personal opinion about this as a technologist and just human is that if someone uses it well, they've not just copied and pasted something that came out of the AI, they've worked with it. It's been back and forth. And they shouldn't be, I don't think they can tell if it's done well. And this is just a human level question as a society we're gonna have to ask ourselves. What is the important work that we care the most about? And how are we gonna get these things done? No one blinks when AI helps you correct your grammar today, because it's been doing that for years. Or suggests a different phrase. You know, if you use the passive voice, the AI will tell you, you should use the active voice here. You don't have to change it, but it suggests it for you. And if you do, we don't think, oh, you cheated. That's not your writing. And we still think it's your writing. We'll have to answer this question as a society. When we get to the place where we're so accustomed to iteratively working with AI that, and I don't mean an exam in high school or college where a student is being asked a question and the student has to generate, what's the capital of Slovakia? But I mean in a work setting, out in the professional world where people have a lot of things to produce, we're gonna have to figure out for ourselves, are we comfortable with having intelligence augmentation at scale? Personally, I think the answer to that is gonna become yes, even if it doesn't start off as yes. I think we're gonna be uncomfortable, and I think we'll get to comfortable. And I think once we see it as augmenting intelligence, we'll get it. And I think your clients, you're delivering proposals for them that you have produced. Now, you had something to accelerate, but you're also bringing to it years of experience in understanding a client. You know what they need. You can figure out how to translate to a funder that also has certain things that they want, right? Because these foundations have a mission. They're trying to get a particular kind of thing done, and you have to find where those meet. And you're bringing that to it. If someone just jumped off of the wagon and said, well, I'm gonna become a grant writer because I have generative AI, they're never gonna be able to get to your level. Not overnight. Now, if they keep at it for some years, they can get a lot better. But you're also bringing that. And so I think as we learn to pay attention to that, we're gonna better understand the difference between thinking just AI and understanding IA, intelligence augmentation. But if you have I'd love to hear your reflections if you have different thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, I will say that I've been doing this for 33 years. So pretty much all the city funders, the city departments, they all know when one of my proposals comes across because of my style, they know my creativeness, they know my wording. But I've tried to use, and I have put some grant questions because I work with only small Black-led organizations. I don't work with other, I'm not discriminating, but I feel like my reasoning is I'm white. I know I have privilege, and I use my privilege to help the Black population. And sometimes it's not a good thing, but in my grant writing, I've had to learn to do it from the heart of a Black-led organization versus a white person's thoughts and feelings. AI has helped me to get better at that because I can even, and it's crazy, but I mean, I use ChatGPT a lot. And because I put in the organization's names and I have an account, it can go back through everything I've asked it and still relate it to that organization, which is mind-blowing sometimes. But it actually, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I still have to go back and read through it and make sure that that's what I feel. But I mean, I do like it in that sense that it does help me, and I'll put in the actual grant question sometimes because it gets to, when you're a grant writer and you've been doing it for so long, you lose that, sometimes you lose that creativeness, or it just gets stale and you just cannot think of the answer. And sometimes it's like it knows what I'm thinking, which is really scary. But because of the questions I have asked it in the past, it's picking up on my thought patterns and how I do that. But I'm curious, is there a certain platform you prefer over others, besides the two that I have used?
Yes, so part of what we do is to help clients figure out, because there's so many things out there, what makes sense for them, and we provide an ethical framework, believe in creative policy, ethical AI ethics policy guide, so organizations can internally govern what they're doing. So it depends. I would not position kind of off the cuff without knowing any further context than what you've given me about what you're doing in the organization, is that the big frontier model companies, Anthropic and OpenAI, Microsoft has Copilot, Google has Gemini. They all have gotten their products to the point where, at first, 2.5 years ago, was you put in something and it would just create lots of things that were not true, or it would be strange. So it's gotten so much better so quickly, and it's gonna get a lot better. Not perfect, still has problems. That I think a good argument can be made for using any of those platforms. One of the strengths of OpenAI's models, one, they pioneered this thing. They have been an industry standard, meaning they come up with something and then everybody else will come up with a version of it 3 or 4 months later, and good versions. They were very competitive if you benchmark. It's just that OpenAI went there first, and they're constantly adding more value. If you sign up for something, even the free versions have gotten better, and the paid versions, they keep adding stuff to it. So I wouldn't, in a comparative basis of the performance, I wouldn't pick out one. I would say that Anthropic's Claude, for a while, was better at writing than the others. And in general, if someone were just going to start off as a writer, based on what some industry experts have said, I would say you might want to look at Claude first. But they've all gotten so good. And it depends on the person who's prompting it. You don't need to be a coder. You just need to be a human who can communicate. It's just that once you start working with it, you just learn how to do it better, more skillfully. So on those grounds, I would say they all perform so well. I don't know if you'd see a benefit from switching to another. There are lots of arguments that people have about the companies themselves that provision these large language models. Elon Musk has XAI, his company, I think their product is Grok, that they have more explicitly said that they're not trying to control for ethical outcomes. They see that as something that they don't want to do, and they're not trying to put guardrails around their AI. I think they're just going to get forced to put some guardrails around things for all kinds of reasons, national security practice, all kinds of stuff. But if people are trying to think about that aspect of this, don't want to take into consideration the ethical positions of the companies that are producing the LLMs, that's another way to differentiate. But in terms of the quality of the output, what you're using is going to give you the quality that you need. And it sounds like you're quite skilled in figuring out how to optimize by uploading things, telling it, give it some context and directions. Here are examples on doing things. In the past, I think what you referred to, I think, is OpenAI is called memory, where it'll just remember the conversations and bring that into everything. And that has improved that personalization. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the flip side of AI content generation and talk a little about AI content consumption? Because if you're writing these grants and you're using AI, on the same token, they're going to use the same kind of software to assess and score applications, and so it's being savvy to all of that. HR's been doing this for years with resumes, right? You send in a resume, it doesn't have the right things on it, it goes into a black hole, but everything gets scored. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, thank you. These are really terrific questions. Yeah, so it sounds like some industry experience there. You know how this stuff works. And with the resumes, it's your question is elucidating because it points to a pattern that, as you said, there's already a history of, I'm not going to say gaming the system because that sounds cynical, but taking these shortcuts to try to read through a lot of things. If you're doing a job search and you get 10 applications, you can read 10 applications. If you get 10,000 applications, it's just not humanly possible to read 10,000 people that try to use software to get through these things. And it's not a surprise AI, particularly the generative AI, has gotten used, as you indicated, both to write resumes, to construct them. I've read that people are using LinkedIn to upload AI generated, to actually use AI to submit resumes on LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't care if you use AI to produce a CV. They have no idea how you do that, a resume. But to submit it, to upload it onto LinkedIn, people have been automating that, and this will be something else. The point is that people are using it on both sides. So as the AI gets better at summarizing and elevating certain things, I don't think there's a legitimate case for saying that that's not useful. Anyone who's tried to use it, has just experienced it, would be hard pressed to say, oh, that's completely useless. Even if they don't want to keep using it, I think they'd have to admit, well, yeah, that it's actually really good at taking textual content, of picking out things that you tell it to pick out. And I don't just mean keywords, because that was a previous. This is actually things that are not in a particular word or sentence. It's more higher level things that it can pick out. And you don't even need to get into the question, well, does the AI actually know anything or not? Just for the same reason, you don't need to get into a debate of whether your GPS actually knows where it's going. We just know that if you use it, it'll get you there. And we can have a philosophical debate about whether it knows where it's going, but like my watch can tell me the time. Does my watch know what time it is? It tells me the time as far as we go. Because it's useful, I don't think organizations are going to stop using it. And I do think it can be very helpful to pick things out. However, it's also true that this gets into the bias thing, that because the AI is already trained on on lots of different kinds of data, not certain kinds, these large language models are these big things that people tend to think of when they hear the term generative AI. So OpenAI's ChatGPT, Microsoft's Gemini, Amazon has an LLM whose name is escaping me right now, and Microsoft has what they call Copilot. That's been trained on almost everything online. which means that it has ingested a lot of patterns. One of multiple studies in hiring practices have noted that AI that is used for hiring has repeatedly shown a bias of race and gender to discriminate against women and people of color. And that's been documented multiple times. I don't think that means there should be no AI that's used. I think that means if you're gonna use this, you need to be very strategic and deliberate in correcting for those biases. The nice thing about generative AI is you can go in and prompt the thing. You can actually instruct it that, here are patterns of bias, be sure to avoid doing these kinds of things. If you're looking at an application from a female applicant, do not use these assumptions that have tended to discriminate against women. Don't assume that this in the resume means a lack of this in experience. You can actually go in and tell it that and make it conform to the conditioning and programming that you give. That's called prompting. But you have to be deliberate in doing that. And I think that we're gonna need more human expertise. I'm a humanities professor. I used to run a humanities center, and I'll say doing so has caused me to become especially cognizant, and I'm also a technologist and I run a tech company. And it's made me much more cognizant of the need to have people with the human skills who understand societal things to participate in running and controlling technology. Because when you bring that into your HR practices, they don't just know data, they don't just know spreadsheets, they don't just know the technical part of HR. They know about histories of discrimination, they understand structures of systems of inequality. Then you can factor that into how you're using the software. So yes, AI is being used to generate, AI is being used to read what's generated. I don't think that's gonna go away. Personally, I would not advocate for it to go away. Other people might disagree, and I think we should have that conversation. I do think we have got to be much more intentional and deliberate about addressing problems of inequality. And this is why I personally want to see more communities of people who love and care about the thing that King was fighting for, to be in charge of the policy at organizations, the adoption for AI, the creation of it, the regulation of it. I think that's how we're gonna address these problems. AI didn't invent racism, it was here before AI was here. Sexism was here before AI came around. And you get rid of all the AI in the world, you're still gonna have racism and sexism if you don't do this anti-racism work, and if you don't do this anti-sexism work. So that's not trying to make an excuse for AI. It's saying that these are foundational things, and when we have that human level expertise, we can actually address these problems when we treat them as comprehensive. If you have something to say or add about that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well.
I just wondered if you had, any insights into, and it all comes down to the training. And the only way you'll get rid of sexism and racism in these artificial intelligence is to provide more content. Like you were saying, all of these big AI things, they're using what's on the internet. Well, we know that stuff on the internet a lot of it's really bad. That's what it's being trained with, and it's it's like how do you counter that? You start flooding it with accurate, good stuff, but where does this you could talk about this forever, and it's a huge sort of dilemma. So.
But there are solutions. You're right. The training data and the training itself.
And like you said, it has to be intentional. So who is motivated to do this? Well, these things are being created by very large companies, and they've been very slow to be motivated to do that additional training. It had to be pointed out to them. It's like, oh, everything's fine, everything's perfect, because they're never going to admit that it's not. And then when it is finally, then they start doing these little baby steps to address it, and it's just going to take a very long time.
Very true. Yes.
I don't really have a question, just more kind of an internal observation for myself, which
Yes.
is I'm a self-described Luddite. I'm the last person to adopt technology. I'm not adding another app, another thing, I'm not paying more money for stuff, until I absolutely have to. I finally got in a
What did you get?
A Waymo.
A Waymo, yes, the taxi, yes.
And I was just like, I'm not paying more money for a slow ride. You know what I mean? So part of my thing is just like, I find myself resistant to AI. One, I work in government, so like we have a bunch of rules around like what technologies we can add, like, you know, what we can use, what we cannot use. But in part, most of my job is like either talking to people or writing something. I'm writing an email, I'm writing a report, I'm writing a text message, or I'm in a meeting and I'm verbally communicating to my team, decision makers, whomever, about whatever topic it is. And so when it comes to writing, like so much of my thinking is through writing. And so it's even just thinking about a little bit of the grant conversation that something you mentioned, like AIs are just talking to each other. I'm like, what are we even doing here? Right? Like, do we even need the report? Like, can we just, so just, it kind of, it has a little more philosophical question, just like, what's the purpose of all this like content that we're creating, and who's it for, who's consuming it, and why are we even doing it in the first place? Could be one question. But just like, even just like how it changes even the work we do or the way that we think through using AI to do it versus my own self to think of the thing, and then even changing communication. Because some things that AI writes just like literally don't make any sense. You're just like, what does that paragraph mean? What's the meaning of it? And it doesn't have meaning. So just curious if your reflections on like other folks like myself who are resistant to technology, like where you hear that coming from, and like what's kind of the way to think about the way it not only changes the work we do, but how we work and how we think interacting with these type of technologies.
Yeah, these are such terrific questions. Thank you. So I told you I'm a humanities professor who's been working on technology, and I guess about 11 years ago started to pay attention to what I see as such an important and profound intersection of humanities and technology. And I started out being convinced that the things that the developments we're seeing with AI, and not just AI, with other innovations and things like machine-human combining, it's called cybernetics. People get implants, usually for medical reasons, but all kinds of reasons. And genomics, right now, I think for a little over a year, so in December 2023, the Food and Drug Administration approved CRISPR-9 methodology to cure, so not treat, cure sickle cell anemia. And so it's literally rewriting people's DNA so that in this case, people's bodies are producing normal red blood cells. All of those things are changing humans. And I started out as a humanities professor feeling that the quote unquote object of this game, it's not a game, it's part of human culture where people are doing scientific research and technology innovation. But if I can use that phrase, the object of the game was about humans. That these machines are being engineered to do more and more of the things that people do. And as a humanities professor, my first question was, but what does it mean to be human? If we're doing more human things with non-human systems, what does it say about those systems? And what does it say about us? And this is 11 years later, I'm still convinced that is one of the most profound questions that we have to wrestle with. It's not a technical question. It's like the GPS thing. You know, I said we can have a philosophical debate about whether the GPS actually knows anything. Now, I'm actually really interested in that question. And I realize a lot of people aren't because they don't, they're just trying to get something done. They just want to get to where they're going accurately. And I appreciate that. And this is actually an important question. And the issue of the resistance to the technology, the question of how do material innovations change human society is such an important question. The invention of the so-called modern printing press, because we know ancient China had printing technology for many, many centuries, but in the 15th century, the movable type press would get developed and implemented by Johannes Gutenberg. And if you look at the controversies of the 15th century and the 16th century around printing, it, I think, is useful, it's helpful for understanding what we're experiencing today, because humans evolved to have short attention spans. And you probably heard this before, that you get eaten by a tiger if you're sitting down reading a book when saber-tooth tigers. You're gonna get a long attention span does not help you survive. A short attention span helps you because you're constantly looking up. You see those wildlife videos where the antelope has got his head down in the grass and the lion comes up. And the antelope that are constantly looking up, they get to escape. They live longer. They get to reproduce. You know, we evolved to have short attention spans. And then, and even though printing, literacy had been around for a long time, where humans had read things for thousands of years, until the 1400s, most people couldn't afford to have something in writing. Because first you had to have paper, which was very expensive to make, and most people didn't know how to make paper. So you had to have the know-how, you had the means, and if you just had one sheet, that wasn't really interesting. What you really want is a manuscript, you know, is a big thing, and eventually a codex. And so the institutions that had the money to have those things were monasteries. So you could go work for one of those and work for free, recopying those texts, and they would let you read everything. But then printing technology with movable press made it possible for lots of people who had very little money to read stuff. And it changed our attention span, and it changed our behavior. And some people said, in the religious context, because the first thing it was used was for printing religious materials, the Bibles and commentaries and things. And people were saying that, so usually if you went to hear scriptures read, you'd go to someone who knew how to read, and that was at a church or a synagogue or a mosque. And you listened to people read scripture, because you didn't know how to read. You'd listen to them read. And that's how most people encounter scripture. And so usually when people were reading things, they were reading out loud for other people to listen. The practice of sitting by yourself and reading something was not something that most people had ever seen done. Remember, most people can't read. If they want to hear something read, they go listen to it being read. It's being read out loud. Someone just sitting there by themselves reading a book, that was scary. It looked weird. It's like when we see people, if you could think back a few years, the first time people had Bluetooth in their ear, and you just see it looks like they're talking to themselves, it looked weird. You know, now we've gotten used to it. But that was controversial. People said that it could invite demon possession, spirit possession, if you were sitting around mumbling to yourself, reading, because it looked like what people did when people thought that people were demon possessed. They said that it was going to destroy human culture, that people were not going to want to do anything because they're just sitting around reading all the time. You know, now, if you have a teenager, you try to get them to read, will you please read something that's longer than a blog? So, yes, we should be concerned about how it changes behavior. The history of technology and humans is that people are changing their behavior. That doesn't mean all change should happen. It just means that this is not our first rodeo. And so I think that's useful to keep in mind. It absolutely will change our behavior. We've had controversies before. I think we're going to continue to have them. And I think that people should not, I think it's great that you have this circumspection about the technology. And I don't think everybody should feel like, oh, well, you know, all my buddies are doing X, I guess I should do it. The question is, well, do you want to do that thing? I have people who are big sports fans. That doesn't mean everybody has to be a sports fan. There are people who love skiing. That doesn't mean everybody, et cetera, right? We will have communities of people who are not doing AI. We have communities of people today who don't stream, who don't have flip phones, who do have flip phones because they don't have smartphones, et cetera. And then there is the issue of, you said, well, if my AI is writing the thing and your AI is reading it, why bother? You're never going to read it anyhow. You didn't say exactly that, but if you take it to its logical end, that if I have a meeting and you send your AI to the meeting to take notes, and everybody sends their AI to the meeting, and why should I even show up for the meeting? None of you are there. You know, why can't I just have to tell my AI to send the message to your AI, and we could just skip this whole meeting thing? And some people say, yes, we need fewer meetings. And other people say, well, it is good that human beings get from out of our offices, from behind our screens, and get in a room together, and maybe over lunch or something, or tea or coffee, and we actually have conversations in that meeting. So I guess there are 3 points I would just try to summarize. It's not our first rodeo. We've had these questions before. They're very important questions. They are not less important than the other questions about the environmental impact and the sourcing of materials and the effect on the economy and jobs. It's not less important than that. I think it points to the need to have more humanists who are participating in leading, not just adding to the conversation, but leading technology. We need, and that's not against STEM people. I'm trying to say we need to include more voices because we need them. And it's also the right thing to do. And we actually need these voices because it is going to change our society. It's already changing our society. We need to figure out how to teach people to write. You know, I'm a college professor. I have to assign writing to students. I also run a company where we engage with clients who have a big challenge, getting people in their organizations to understand and implement this technology. And if all I ever do is tell my college students not to use AI, I'm not helping them to have a professional life. Because when they got into the profession, and unless they're independently wealthy and they have to get jobs, they need to know how to bring value to those organizations. And they need to be literate in understanding not just how to use these technologies, but how to use them in light of their problems. They need to know how to responsibly, they need the ethical sensibilities, etc. So I love the question, very important, and we need that comprehensive approach. Anyone else?
I'll do the one more, if nobody else has one. Which maybe just building on your last question, which is, you know, if we think about the last industrial revolution, if this is the next one, like what would we have wanted to do different? If MLK was alive at that time, right? Or if the thinkers of that day, like what could have been done differently to avoid some of the things that maybe are just repeating, which is like kinds of industry people who have dictating the terms under which that revolution occurs and using the environment and humans in order to extract profits. Like that's like a very, obviously a very gross oversimplification of that, but some of those things are still happening, including the fact that the regular industrial revolution that is making these tools, manufacturing the hardware, is like literally still exploiting either land or people or both in the environment. So just like without ownership, like what are we just on the outside like trying to like get in? Like where do we fit in terms of actually steering this revolution in a way that is more equitable?
I love that question. Do you have thoughts about it? Because I'd love to hear if you have thoughts.
My thought would just be, I mean, if you're not tabling around the menu, so like who's owning it, who's actually making decisions, and how to have more people of color, which in terms of the American context, because of our knowledge gap in terms of folks who are Black and brown finishing school in the degrees in these programs and being able to get into these companies into decision-making roles, like we just seem so far behind, it seems hard to imagine, like what's the shortcut? Like we can't wait for the next generation of like people's like work their way up, we don't have that time, and so it just seems like what's the shortcut to that?
Yeah. Now this question, you know, so the problem, the challenges and opportunity of technology innovation are fundamentally problems and opportunities of capital. And I'm not talking about capitalism or socialism. I mean, you said ownership, and that's the best word. I think ownership, because it gets to the heart of it. And it doesn't. I think it helps people to not think in terms of these binaries of monism versus another. This ownership and participation. It is not usually presented that way. You know, usually, and I didn't present it here because of how I'm talking about supporting these organizations. But it's not irrelevant. It's fundamentally relevant to that. I think, Aaron, you can elaborate on this as you have in the past about King's approach to ownership and capital and his concern about shared prosperity and how that was very, very central to what he was doing. This is such an important opportunity and it's such an important challenge because trillions and trillions of dollars of new GDP are getting created in the coming years, largely because of AI and genomics. Okay? And I'll make this quick because we're just about a couple minutes to 12. So it will be important. I think we need a global approach to governing technology, to managing it. We hear in the news every day the United States is trying to do this thing from a nationalist approach and national security. And I don't think we should not have national security. I think all peoples in the world, I think every nation in the world needs national security. I don't think some nations need it and others don't. I think all human beings should have access to that. And I think that includes the United States and everybody else too. So I'm not against national security, I'm for it. It's just not, that can't control everything that we do. You know, we still live on the same planet with other people. And there's only one actual economy, it's the global economy. There's actually the only one there is, and there's not another one. And so I do think that we need to structure ways for more people to participate in owning things, like the benefit of their data. And if AI is gonna create this much wealth, you know, one way is to say, well, all this AI and all this wealth, this is wrong. We should just get rid of it, right? And I say, well, can we have a conversation for the question that you just asked, right? If we're gonna if there's a possibility of creating that much wealth in the next 10 years or 20 years, can we have a conversation about how that might be done in a way for there to be more inclusive growth so that more people can get access to more? If we're gonna have trillions and trillions of dollars, can we get like 3% of that to address housing security or food security? Can we have a workshop on that and figure that out and start implementing? And so it is an opportunity, and I think it has to be global, because if it's just the US, we're allergic to things in the US that look and smell like too much shared prosperity. And we have names that we use to refer to those things. Right? And I think if we look globally, it can help our imagination. And you know, if we look at African nations, you know, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has a lot of the minerals that make this technology possible. $25 trillion worth of lithium is under the feet of people in the Democratic Republic, the DRC. But as the United States, we intentionally overthrew a democratically elected government there in the 60s, Patrice Lumumba, in partnership with Belgium. And then we funded dictatorship for decades to keep people from benefiting. And so I think we need an international approach so that we can get more people included, because I think we're coming up on an opportunity to create more wealth that could be more shared. And before we feel like we just need to stop it, I think your question is a question we need to try to answer together, because it can actually be structured in a way, you still have, I'm not against free enterprise, private ownership, but that doesn't have to be done and treated as something that's against collective and participation. There are ways to structure things where people can have more participation and more shared things, and you can still have some private stuff. If we're talking about tens of trillions, I mean, come on, people. There's gonna be room to share, I mean, really. So thank you for the questions, thank you for all of these, and thanks again to you, Aaron, for this invitation.